What's up everyone and welcome back to the World History Channel. Before we begin, please hit the subscribe button today. Let's get started. In mythology, the first sirens weren't the seductresses we know today. Through myth and media, sirens have enticed sailors for thousands of years, haunted coastlines and changed shape. They developed into the seductive mermaids of our modern imagination in the following manner. Famous Greek hero Odysseus faces a variety of difficulties in his quest to return home after the Trojan War, including giant cannibals and enigmatic enchantresses. However, one obstacle stands out as possibly the most evocative, perilous, and enduring of all: the siren's hypnotic and mesmerizing song to sailors passing by. To stop is certain death. Even now, audiences simply cannot get enough of these powerful and mysterious figures, out of all the Greek mythical creatures. Since Homer's writing of the Odyssey in the 8th century BC, sirens have been a part of the Western imagination. They can be found in the writings of ancient Roman authors like Ovid and Pliny the Elder, and one even appears in Dante's Divine Comedy. They captivated 19th century painters and are now the inspiration for television shows and the siren core fashion aesthetic promoted by creators of social media. However, these mythological beings have undergone significant form shifts over the course of time to reflect society's complicated and ever-changing relationship with desire. In contemporary popular culture, sirens are enticing creatures of the sea, typically female characters with glistening mermaid tails. However, their ancient Greek ancestors were bird-bodied creatures that were associated with death rather than fish. The evolution of sirens over time and the reason their song is still so audible in popular culture are outlined in the following. What are sirens? The first time the sirens appear is in Homer's Odyssey. Thought to have been composed sometime in the 8th century BC, the poem follows the winding path of the hero Odysseus as he returns home to Ithaca and his long-suffering wife from the Trojan War. Along the way, he faces Greek gods, marvels, and monsters, including the sirens. He is warned about the creatures by the sorceress Circe, who informs him that they enchant everyone who passes by. A man will never return to his home if an ignorant individual approaches them and listens to their voices. Odysseus plugs his men's ears with wax, so they won't be lured, but he leaves his own ears free and commands his men to bind him to the ship's mast, so he's able to hear their promises as they tempt him with the prospect of knowledge and tales of heroic deeds. However, the Odyssey isn't the only story with sirens. They also appear in the Argonautica, a 3rd century BC epic poem following Jason and the Argonauts in their search for the Golden Fleece, where sirens are described as daughters of the river god Aeschylus and the muse Terpsichore. To drown out their song, the musician Orpheus grabs his lyre, but not before one of the crew members plunges into the ocean. Parthenope, Ligeia, and Leucosia are said to have been the names of those sirens, according to custom. The siren's distinctive voice is perhaps its most significant and enduring characteristic. According to Marie-Claire Beaulieu, an associate professor of classical studies at Tufts University, it is a hypnotic voice that entices listeners, causes them to forget everything, and frequently induces sleep. In essence, people are hypnotized to the point where they forget everything. In Greek culture, what do sirens represent? According to Beaulieu, when the ancients spoke of sirens, they meant a woman with the body of a bird. Closely associated with death, sirens' bird legs and wings show that they're liminal creatures who dwell betwixt and between. Their connection with the sea, which the ancient Greeks considered profoundly dangerous, and their wings, situate them somewhere between earth and air. Sirens were a fixture of ancient Greek funerary art, such as stele, a type of grave marker. For instance, a funerary plaque from the 7th century BC that can be found in the Boston Museum of Fine Arts depicts a scene of mourning with 2 women standing in front of a couch holding a corpse. Underneath, a siren is crooked. Some sources, including Euripides' 5th century BC play Helen and Ovid's 8th century AD poem Metamorphoses, associate the sirens with Persephone, the goddess of spring carried off by Hades, god of the underworld, to become his queen. According to some accounts, they were given wings to search for Persephone. Beaulieu asserts that the Argonautica and other sources depict sirens as the daughters of one of the muses. Except that in a way, they're the muses of death instead of the muses of life, because they lure people to death with this singing, says Beaulieu. How the iconography of sirens has evolved. Sirens reportedly lulled men to sleep with their song and then tore them to pieces in the fabulous birds section of Pliny the Elder's Natural History, which was written around AD 77. They retained their bird bodies well beyond the time of the Roman Empire. However, the siren evolved throughout the Middle Ages. They started displaying fishtails rather than bird bodies more and more. The two types coexisted from the 12th through 14th centuries at least, Beaulieu explains, but eventually the mermaid-like creature emerged as dominant. That shift is probably thanks in part to the strong Greek and Roman tradition of unrelated sea gods like Triton, as well as the siren's association with water. But it's also thanks in no small part to the influence of Celtic folklore traditions. Beaulieu refers to a tradition that dates back to the 14th century that talks about Saint Brendan the Navigator, an early Irish Christian whose journeys parallel those of Odysseus. On his journey, he naturally encounters a siren, but this one is completely recognizable to modern audiences as a mermaid. How Greek mythology has been influenced by Christianity as the physical appearance of the sirens began to shift, so did their symbolic meaning. The sirens of ancient Greece were considered beautiful, but they tempted Odysseus with songs of glory, not simply sex. Ancient Greeks were more concerned with power dynamics, so a man having sex with a subordinate woman wasn't a problem. You get into trouble when you have a goddess having sex with a mortal, for instance, explains Beaulieu. That would have contributed to the siren's threatening nature in part. But medieval Christianity saw sex and sirens differently. As a way to talk about the enticements of worldly pleasures and the deceitful and destructive pull of sin, they became symbols of temptation itself. Hence the appearance of a siren in Dante's 14th-century Divine Comedy. The very same creature who tempted Odysseus comes to Dante in a dream and identifies herself as the pleasing siren, who in mid-sea leads mariners astray. In the end, his companion and guide through the underworld, the epic poet Virgil, grabs her, tears her clothes, and shows that the medieval siren is sexually alluring but repulsive. With their perilously enticing songs, those medieval temptresses are unmistakably the forerunners of modern sirens. The association between sirens, mermaids, and temptation only grew tighter in the 19th century, when painters returned again and again to creamy-skinned, bare-breasted sirens with lavish hair. There is no better example than John William Waterhouse's turn-of-the-century painting The Siren, where a lovely young woman gazes down at a stricken, shipwrecked young sailor who looks both terrified and enthralled. The appeals of contemporary popular culture, the sirens continue to ring after millennia. They even serve as the basis for a fashion aesthetic known as siren core, which is characterized by a beachy, romantic appearance with a slight tinge of menace. Modern creatives, meanwhile, are still turning to the sirens as a source of inspiration and a rich symbol for exploring power, gender, and knowledge. The new Netflix film Sirens, starring Julianne Moore and based on Molly Smith Metzler's 2011 play Elamino P., explicitly addresses the mythological figure. Director Nicole Kassell told The Hollywood Reporter, "I love the idea of analyzing the idea of what a siren is, and who says what a siren is, the sailor. It's very fun to get to go back and consider it from a female lens." Black sirens navigate the challenges of modern-day sexism and racism in Bethany C. Morrow's 2020 film A Song Below Water, Vanessa Vida Kelly's 2025 film When the Tides Held the Moon, about a Puerto Rican immigrant who falls in love with a merman on Coney Island at the turn of the century. Using characters who have long been resented and misunderstood for their controversial power, sirens present an opportunity for many authors to challenge conventional narratives and notions. The Sirens by Amelia Hart is one such modern-day retelling, which weaves between the modern day and the 19th century transportation of Irish women convicts to Australia. I thought this mythological creature was the perfect way to give my female characters some power back into this historical narrative, she explains. She states, "I wanted to make this general comment on how we think about women and how we have this idea of women as being temptresses, and we demonize them and overly sexualize them, as a way of trying to explain or perhaps diminish their power." She is referring to the way that we view women. In the hands of modern-day writers, the sea can become a place of transformation, freedom, and potential. Additionally, sirens can be brought back to a position of wisdom, power, and yes, even danger. One of the most enduring and adaptable themes in the entire Western mythological canon is the haunting, ethereal song of the siren, a melody that promises transcendent knowledge but only oblivion. This is a testament to humanity's ongoing fascination with the intersection of desire, danger, and the unknown. From their terrifying beginnings in the stark, honor-driven world of ancient Greece to their current reign as icons of a particularly potent social media aesthetic and their transformation into the voluptuous, fish-tailed temptresses of medieval Christian allegory, sirens have constantly shape-shifted to reflect the deepest anxieties and most forbidden desires of the cultures that resurrect them. Their transformation from birdwoman to mermaid is more than just a shift in iconography. It's a profound transformation of meaning and a journey that reflects our own complicated relationship with temptation, femininity, death, and the seductive power of the unknown. The siren's song, which first appeared in the epic verses of Homer's Odyssey, has never truly vanished. Rather, it has only altered its pitch and adapted its lyrics to entice each new generation, demonstrating that the most perilous allure is not that which poses a threat to the body but rather that which promises to satisfy the soul's most desperate yearning, only to reveal the promise as a prelude to ruin. The original 8th century BC sirens' Greek world, as narrated by Homer, were creatures of profound and terrifying ambiguity, far removed from the glamorous mermaids of contemporary fantasy. They are not described in great physical detail in the Odyssey. Rather, their power is contained in their voice, a weapon of psychological and spiritual destruction. Odysseus is told by the sorceress Circe that they pose a unique threat because they not only kill but also destroy. They make an exquisite promise that makes the listener never return to his home, nor his wife and little children happy to see him come home, erasing all past and future. We know all the toil that the Argives and Trojans endured in wide Troy through the will of the gods, and we know all things that come to pass upon the fruitful earth. Their song is a siren call to the very heart of Greek masculine identity. Kleos, which means glory, and nostos, which means homecoming. It also entices Odysseus with the promise of inexhaustible knowledge. An intellectual and spiritual seduction is the original and perhaps most potent lure of the siren. The solution that Odysseus came up with is a masterpiece of self-aware vulnerability and control. By having himself bound to the mast while his crew's ears are plugged with wax, he engineers a scenario where he can experience the ultimate temptation without succumbing to it, thus mastering the threat through a combination of cunning, métis, and forced endurance. This primal encounter establishes the siren not as a sexual predator, but as an existential one, a creature whose song threatens to dissolve the heroic self into a state of blissful, fatal passivity. The physicality and origins of the sirens began to be described in later Greek and Roman sources. They were frequently portrayed as the daughters of the river god Aeachelus and a muse, typically Terpsichore, the muse of choral song and dance, or Melpomene, the muse of tragic art. They transform into dark divinities as a result of their divine parentage, elevating them from mere monsters to perversions of their mother's artistic inspiration. Their song inspires a fatal attraction to death rather than life and creation. Their hybrid appearance, which combined the bodies of birds and women, was full of symbolic meaning. Birds were frequently regarded as psychopomps in the ancient Greek worldview, being creatures associated with the soul and the transition between life and death. According to classicist Marie-Claire Beaulieu, entities that exist in the threshold spaces of sea and sky, life and death, were identified by the siren's bird-like legs and wings. Their role in funerary art made this connection to death clear. Sirens were frequently carved on grave steels, where they were believed to mourn the dead with their haunting music, serving as muses of death rather than life. Their association with Persephone, the abducted underworld queen, strengthened their position as guides to the afterlife. The hero Orpheus overwhelms their deadly melody with his own divine, life-affirming music on the lyre in the Argonautica. However, not before one of the crew members, Bouts, leaps to his doom, demonstrating the song's enduring power. The siren's threat is neutralized by a greater art than binding. During the Middle Ages, when classical pagan symbols were systematically reinterpreted through a Christian theological lens, the siren's great transformation from a birdwoman of death to a fish-tailed temptress of sin began in earnest. It's likely that multiple traditions were combined in this shift in iconography. Triton and other sea gods existed in the classical world, so the siren's inherent connection to the sea made the evolution into an aquatic form logical if not inevitable. However, the decisive influence was the rich corpus of Celtic and Northern European folklore, which was filled with stories of merfolk and water spirits, often possessing a dangerous and alluring quality. Stories such as Saint the Irish monk Brendan the Navigator, who lived in the 6th century and went on a mythical journey when he met a beautiful fish-tailed creature who tried to seduce him, was the ideal vehicle for transforming the traditional siren. In these Celtic tales, the mermaid seamlessly adopted the Greco-Roman counterpart's symbolic role. With this new fish-tailed form came a radical reinterpretation of the siren's symbolic meaning. The medieval Christian siren's temptation was overwhelmingly sexual, whereas the Greek sirens was intellectual and glorious. In a worldview that framed earthly desires, especially sexual desire, as a dangerous snare diverting the soul from its path to God, the siren became the perfect allegory for the deceitful and destructive nature of sin. The fleeting pleasure of worldly indulgence was represented by her beautiful face and captivating song, while the spiritual corruption and damnation that followed was represented by her hidden, monstrous lower body. The Divine Comedy, written in the 14th century by Dante Alighieri, is where this new siren finds her most well-known literary form. Dante describes a stuttering woman, with squinting eyes and crooked on her feet, with maimed hands and pallid in her color, in his dream in Purgatorio. But when he looks at her, she changes into a beautiful siren, singing, "I am the pleasing siren, who in mid-sea leads mariners astray," which captivates him. Dante's guide and reason, Virgil, intervenes and tears open her clothes to reveal her belly, whose stench awakens Dante from his stupefied trance. Only then does her hideous nature become apparent. The beautiful appearance of the siren conceals a rotten core, a direct representation of the medieval Christian belief in the deceitfulness of fleshly pleasure. Here, the siren is the symbol of sinful temptation. In the art of the 19th century, this image of the siren as a dangerously sexual being reached its peak. The Victorian era, with its strict public morals and intense private ostentation, was obsessed with the femme fatale, or fatal woman, who could destroy men with her beauty. The theme was used repeatedly by artists like John William Waterhouse, Edward Armitage, and Gustave Moreau. Waterhouse's 1900 painting The Siren is iconic, a pre-Raphaelite beauty with lavish, flowing hair and creamy skin perches on a rock, playing a lyre and gazing down with a mixture of cool detachment and possessiveness at a handsome, shipwrecked sailor who looks up at her with an expression of terror and rapt fascination. The archetype's complete transformation is captured in the painting. This siren is no longer a birdwoman associated with funerary rites. She is a classic mermaid, and her weapon is her overt, almost confrontational sexuality. She is no longer tempting Odysseus with tales of the Trojan War. She is tempting the sailor with the promise of her own body, a promise that the viewer understands leads to a watery grave. The sultry mermaids of contemporary film, animation and literature, whose danger is intrinsically linked to their sexual allure, are the direct ancestors of these Victorian sirens. The siren has undergone yet another transformation in the 21st century, escaping the confines of narrative to become a diffuse but potent cultural aesthetic. On social media platforms like TikTok, the term siren core has been used to describe a fashion and beauty trend that was inspired by the mythical creature. Iridescent scales, accessories made of seashells, wet-look hair, makeup that looks like water droplets, and a general aura of mystical, otherworldly allure are all part of this style. The original siren's association with death is largely absent in its current form. The siren of today is a figure of strength and awe-inspiring beauty. She is the fantasy of possessing a power so potent that it can effortlessly captivate and command attention, and of being irresistibly desirable. This reflects a cultural moment in which female sexuality is increasingly viewed as a source of personal agency rather than just a danger or sin, even though it is still complex and often contested. The ability of the contemporary siren to captivate and entice a digital audience is her carefully curated online persona, or song. However, even in this sanitized appearance, the ancient threat persists. Despite her glitz, the social media diva still engages in some form of seduction. The promise is now validation, community, and an idealized identity, not knowledge or sex. The potential for a different kind of oblivion, a loss of self in the pursuit of likes, follows, and an unattainable aesthetic, is a modern parallel to the fate of the mesmerized sailors of old. The siren's enduring power lies in this very adaptability. She is a mirror. She represented the fear of losing one's heroic identity and nostos to the lure of passive knowledge for the ancient Greeks. She represented the terror of the flesh and the seductive path to sin for medieval Christians. She reflected Victorian anxieties and fascination with unrestrained female sexuality. She also brings the complex desire to be seen, desired, and transformed into something magical and powerful to the digital age, pointing out the potential dangers of becoming lost in that very pursuit. The siren song is our own song, and it has always been our own song, a melody of the things we most desire and most fear, a timeless refrain about the perilous, beautiful, and ultimately human journey between the two. The siren song is still audible today on smartphone screens as well as on funerary markers from ancient Greece.